today we are talking about
Boston.
Yeah.
This is the second city of our 17-city series for game planning, which is why we use the term, where we are hoping to go when we go on our Milwaukee Brewers road trips.
Yeah.
We're stuck in coronavirus stay-at-home mode still. It's going to be a while, I think, before baseball happens. So
yeah.
I've got a sense this year is not going to be a year where we're going to be able to take that trip, but we can sure plan some. We can sure come up with some ideas.
Yeah.
We need you to do something. You see that subscribe button?
Yeah.
Yeah, go and hit that. That way you'll be able to follow all our journeys. And when we say hit the bell, ding, 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 ding. It means that you'll get notifications whenever you find out that there's a new Sorgy Stories video that's coming. Now, for Boston, we typically do a top 5 for most of the cities. We did a top 10 for LA because 2 teams there.
Yep, Dodgers, Angels.
But there's obviously only one in the Boston metro area, so we're just going to do a top 5, but we cheated a little bit.
Yeah, we added 3 more spots each.
For one particularly good reason.
Yeah.
The Freedom Trail. If you ever go to Boston, it is one of America's most historic cities, probably competes with Philadelphia and D.C.
Yeah.
as cradles of American history. This tour, the Freedom Trail, is spectacular. We're each going to give you 3 picks.
Yeah.
Number 1 for you is really the southern end of the Freedom Trail. It is really the gathering point where most people begin with it, and it's also a place where you can play some catch.
Yeah, the Boston Common. It is the oldest park in America, and we have to play catch there. Big public park by the Massachusetts State House.
It's right by the seat of government for the state of Massachusetts as you start to move north on the trail. And on that trail, we get to your number 2.
Granary?
I believe it's pronounced the Granary Burying Ground.
Yeah. It's a burial ground, one of the oldest and most historic in America. 3 signers of the Declaration of Independence are buried there. Samuel Adams, John Hancock, and Robert Treat Payne.
Samuel Adams, of course, well, most of you know the beer.
Yeah.
I'm more of a Milwaukee beer fan, but nothing against Sam Adams. It is a very good beer.
Paul Revere's buried there.
Yeah, the Paul Revere. We'll get into more there with him. Number 3 for you, it's got some big history.
Yeah, the Old State House. The first protest against British law in 1761 was there right by the Boston Massacre in 1770. And the Declaration of Independence first read in Boston, 1776.
14 days, in fact, after they signed the thing.
Yeah. Such a coincidence that Queen Elizabeth II greeted Boston there in 1976.
She made a tour of North America in the 200th birthday of the United States and was like, yeah, you know that whole Revolutionary War thing where we fought you and you sort of split from us? It's fine. We're friends. It's all good.
Yeah.
My 3 picks for the Freedom Trail, of the specific Freedom Trail, I'm going to cheat a little bit, and we'll tell you a little bit about that. The first one is on the northern end of the Freedom Trail. It is the Bunker Hill Monument. This was the site of the first real battle of the Revolutionary Wars in 1775. And the British military was known as the world's best. And they went up against these American revolutionaries that were nowhere near what you would expect from the British Army. And though the British Army won that battle, of the 2,400 soldiers that came from Britain to fight that battle, 1,000 died.
Ow.
And even though America lost that battle, the British held on to that territory at the time. The American forces, really sort of the colonial forces at the time, said, you know what? We can beat these guys.
Yeah.
We can actually win a war against them. By the way, Bunker Hill Monument, you can climb up 297 steps
Or like
and go to the top.
Something like that, 294, 297.
And go to the top. Do you really want to climb 297 or 4 steps?
No.
I didn't think so. Old North Church is also on the northern side of things when it comes to the Freedom Trail. It's a 250-year-old Episcopal church. That is where Paul Revere got the word that the British were coming, where they used this 2-lantern system that was placed in the window. What does 1 lantern mean and 2 lanterns? Do you remember that story?
No.
1 if by land, 2 if by sea, meaning that if it was just 1 lantern, they would be able to tell that the British were coming via land. And if they were coming via sea, meaning a bunch of naval ships trying to attack, there'd be 2 lanterns.
Yeah.
Revere would be able to see that they were coming by sea. So then he grabs his horse and starts, basically, the story goes, the British are coming. The British are coming. My third piece of it is the U.S.S. Constitution Museum. This is the oldest commissioned warship which still exists.
Wow.
Of any naval ship in the world. It's the oldest that still exists. The War of 1812. Again, it was at a time when the British Navy was said to be the best, the most dominant that there was. And this particular warship, which was bigger than any that were in the British Navy, held its own. Beat the British Navy every single time. Now let's move to our regular top 5s. And because we each are using number 1 with the Freedom Trail, we are each going to now mention our 2 through 5. Your number 2 in alphabetical order?
The Boston Duck Tours.
I promise I won't do a Donald Duck impersonation.
I saw Dodger Films do this tour.
Now, Dodger Films, again, for those who don't know what Dodger Films is.
A whole bunch of friends from LA who have just played softball, basketball, baseball, football, and they're big on this website / app you're watching on right now.
YouTube, they have more than 1 million followers.
Yeah.
And I guess what, they traveled to different cities and played various softball games.
Boston, New York City, Toronto, Paris and London.
Yes. So that's worth checking out.
Yeah.
So but that's where you noticed they did this Boston tour.
Yeah. It goes on both land and water.
Very familiar to those of you who travel to Wisconsin Dells. That's what they do for the Dells tours.
29 different, could you say historic spots in Boston?
Mostly historic, not all, but many historic.
Expensive, but worth it. You can get discounts.
Number 3, we already talked about one ship that we definitely want to hit on our tour. Your number 3 is also a boat.
The Boston Tea Party Ships and Museum voted number 1 best patriotic,
which is crazy to me.
Attraction.
That would get number 1 and not someplace on the Freedom Trail.
Yeah, and we can drink tea.
Would you like a
cup of
tea?
Yes. Cup of water.
Yes. I have my own here as well. Mm-hmm. Now your number 4 on this is an obvious one. We will be going to a game at this place on our tour, but you want to see it behind the scenes itself.
Yeah, the Fenway Park tour. It's Fenway Park. That's all you need to know. Mic drop. The oldest park in baseball. The Green Monster. The famous streets around Fenway. The pesky pole. And just so much more history.
It is such an unusual stadium because it is really, it's designed to be sort of fitting in this weird shape of the block where it's located.
Yeah, it's like circular and then it goes straight and then it goes straight again and then circular.
Which also tells you about the streets of Boston, because if you try and drive the streets of Boston, and you've never been there before, you are going to get confused because there's no grid to it. It's just a bunch of randomness. It's very hard to drive. And that really sort of describes the random angles of Fenway Park, why they built the Green Monster in the first place, and why right field is at 380 feet, and what's the right field line? Was it like 305 or something like that?
Yeah, something like that.
So, because they have to build it to the contours of the space where it is.
Yeah.
So that's why. And then your number 5 on your top 5 things to do in Boston is?
The JFK Presidential Library and Museum.
Mm-hmm.
And it would just be cool to see the site of JFK. I appreciate what he did with the entire NASA thing.
Mm-hmm.
I've read books about it, and it's just crazy.
The Kennedy family obviously has been so entrenched in American politics and in diplomacy, and Kennedy played such a massive role in American society in that part of the 20th century. So this is a place, much like the Reagan Museum and Library, which we visited out in California. This tells the story of Kennedy's life and his presidency as well. Number 2 for me when it comes to the attractions number 2 through 5. For me, it's a short drive down to Quincy, Massachusetts for number 2, the birthplace of both our second president, John Adams, and John Quincy Adams. I have no recollection of what number he was on the American presidential list. Do you remember?
5 or 6.
But it's where both presidents lived, where they both were born, a 13-acre area with many different homes, all the different homes on the property where they lived. It's really a chance to look at the philosophy of what John Adams was about and his role in the American Revolution. Number 3 is a statue of the greatest basketball player of all time at City Hall, not Michael Jordan. No. No.
For us Bucks fans especially.
Well, we would love for it to be a Buck, but he wasn't a Buck.
Yeah.
Bill Russell. Why Bill Russell? Well, instead of Michael Jordan. Number 1, best defensive player in the history of the game.
Okay.
Number 2, best rebounder in the history of the game. And the ultimate team player. How many championships did Bill Russell win? Remember?
11?
11 championships in 13 years, more than any other professional sports athlete in the history of the United States.
I could fit all those rings on my fingers.
He can't fit all the rings on his fingers.
Yeah.
You'd have to have 2 on one finger. It also gives him a lot of respect for what he did as a civil rights trailblazer at a time when Boston really was not as on the cusp of civil rights as perhaps it needed to be in the 1950s and 60s. He went through a lot of racism in that city. Thankfully, things have in some ways certainly gotten better. For my number 4, I'm cheating. I'm going back to the Freedom Trail for my number 4 because I could not resist this place. Faneuil Hall, I believe it's pronounced. I'm sure someone can correct me on that if I'm wrong. It was the birthplace of American free speech.
Wow.
The ability for you to be able to speak freely, and it was the first push towards American government, which was the first ever government in modern times to have democracy such as that. Finally, the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston is my number 5. One of the 20 largest art museums in the world. Not just the United States, but the world, which gives Boston a lot of credit. They have nearly 500,000 pieces of art in this building. That's like 10 times the size of Fenway Park. If you try to put one piece of art in one seat of Fenway, they'd have to build 10 Fenway Parks for it.
Yeah. And
they have more Monet artwork than any place outside of his native France. And I love Monet as an artist, so I definitely would suggest that one. And if we go, you're free after 3 o'clock 3 days a week, and it's open those 3 days till 10 o'clock. So if we want to get your art fix, we can do it.
Is Fenway open like that?
Well, not for the tours. Game nights, of course, but not for the tours. Now, when you're doing all this type of stuff and you're getting hungry,
yeah,
we had to pick some top 5s as well for places to eat.